No one in Britain has missed Liz Truss, but as someone who cares little for public opinion, that hasn't stopped Britain's shortest-serving Prime Minister mounting an attempted comeback. She's penned a 4,000-word article for the Sunday Telegraph with this headline: Truss, I was brought down by the left-wing economic establishment. Now, given she was brought down by the financial markets, it's a bit like Corbyn coming to power, getting overthrown by the trade unions and saying he was brought down by the right-wing economic establishment. The markets are not left-wing. Let's have a look at what she wrote. In the essay, Truss wrote this: I had always assumed that Boris would fight the next general election in 2024. Standing for the leadership myself was a faraway prospect, and as a result, I didn't have any kind of infrastructure in place for the contest on which the starting gun had just been fired. So this is her, essentially saying the reason I was crap is because I didn't have any preparation. That is a flat out lie. So basically everyone in Westminster seems to say Liz Truss had been plotting a leadership bid for months. So no one is buying this idea that she was completely taken by surprise because she was so committed to her job as Foreign Secretary. She was known to have been manoeuvring for a very long time. So that excuse falls flat. Most of the article is about the aftermath of the mini budget, and Liz Truss claims no one warned her about the effect a sell-off of government bonds could have on pension funds. And she also said the OBR and Treasury are institutionally in favour of higher taxes and spending. Now, looking back at 12 years of austerity, that doesn't seem especially plausible. That's not what these institutions have been promoting for 12 years. Truss's enemies weren't just limited to within the UK's borders, though. So she wrote, the high spend, high tax policy view does not just prevail in the UK. We were also swimming against the international tide. There was a concerted effort by international actors to challenge our plan for growth. The IMF commented on distributional aspects rather than market stability, which it is hard to conclude was anything but politically motivated. Then there was the intervention from President Biden, who publicly voiced his disagreement with our economic policy, stating, quote, I wasn't the only one that thought it was a mistake. These interventions were sadly in tune with growing efforts on the world stage to limit competition between G7 economies, as evidenced by the proposed global minimum tax rate. Now, I would dispute the commitment of these institutions to having minimum tax rates and stopping corporations basically taking us all for a ride by forcing us to pursue a race to the bottom when it comes to taxes. But, if they were to do that, great. So I don't think many people are on Liz Truss's side, where we need to determine policy so that corporations can have absolute free rein to pit governments against each other. In any case, let's have a look at a video interview, because as well as penning this article for the Sunday Telegraph, Liz Truss has spoken to The Spectator.
It goes back to the point about why have we not won the argument for the past 10 years about keeping taxes low, giving people more control of their own money, cutting business regulation. Why have we not won those arguments? Because we have tried to placate, a lot of the distributionists. And those are people in Britain who think the pie isn't going to get any bigger. The only economic debate is about how we divide it between different people. I fundamentally don't agree with that. I think if you have lower taxes right across the board, the country becomes more successful and that benefits everybody. And I think that's the argument we fundamentally haven't won. Was I trying to fatten the pig on market day? Maybe. There's a long history of failing to make the case. And that's what I'm thinking now. I'm thinking, how can we make that argument? Because it certainly isn't going to make our country successful in the long term, having ever higher taxes, always having the argument that you can't it's never a good time to cut the top rate of tax.
You haven't won the argument because the evidence isn't in your favour. Now, I know we don't come from a position where we say sort of like whatever wins out in the public sphere is the most correct, because I think we recognise that public debate is skewed by things such as corporate power of the media. Most mainstream media in this country is not in favour of tax rises because it's owned by billionaires, right? But if you are supporting low taxes, if you're supporting those policies which all of these oligarchs are also supporting, then what is your explanation for why everyone's been misinformed that actually tax cuts aren't necessarily going to lead to growth and make all of us richer? Because if you look at comparisons, most of the countries which have faster growth than us also have higher taxes than us. The only country you can really look at to support Liz Truss's argument is the United States. And the United States is a very different kettle of fish from the UK. If you look at France, Germany, Scandinavia, higher standards of living, higher tax rates. So it's not just some bizarre blob left-wing economic establishment which is telling people that tax cuts aren't what we need now. It's just looking around the world, right? Truss was also asked about the impact of her mini budget on mortgage rates.
There will also be some people who will be listening, watching this and saying, well, actually, look at the way your premiership ended, look at the market turmoil. Perhaps those people had to renew their mortgages at that time. And yes, there are global factors. And they'll be saying, well, are you the right person to be making the case for growth? And I wonder, what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, on the mortgage point, I do want to address this because we've been living in a very low interest rate world. And mortgage rates have been going up. And the reason there was a specific issue around the time we're talking about in September, a lot of it is to do with the liability-driven investments and the impact they had on the market. So I don't think it's fair to blame interest rate rises on what we did. I think that's unfair.
The Bank of England said it was a 50-50 mix. I think they showed a graph saying half of it was global factors, half of it was UK factors. I mean, would you think that's...
But
fair?
I'm not saying... But on the UK factors, I don't believe... I believe there are other UK factors apart from...
So they were more about the pension issues than they were your major budget.
Well, I'm just saying that is definitely an issue. And of course, we are seeing mortgage rates go up.
So, I mean, we can argue until the cows come home about exactly why mortgage rates went up. But the fact is, I mean, they went up very quickly after she instituted her policy. And you could say, well, it's good to take risks. I can imagine interest rates shifting when John McDonnell announced a budget. But she was announcing something which no one wanted, just tax cuts for the super rich. I mean, there are some rich people that wanted it, but no one else wanted it. So she was risking people's mortgages to benefit just rich and powerful people who ended up not really having her back either. That's why I was all a bit sad. Let's look at one more final clip from Liz Truss. She maintained her overall programme was correct.
I believe that I've learned a lot in my time in government. I understand what some of the pitfalls are. I've been through the mill on this. And we do need to do things differently, and we need to look at how we do things, because whatever people's critique might be of my time in government, the fact is we have had relatively low economic growth for over a decade. And that has a direct impact on everybody in Britain. It has an impact on people of all incomes. And if you look at GDP per capita, we are falling behind other countries. So there's no doubt there's a problem. And what the solution isn't, in my view, putting up taxes or restricting business more. The solution has to be about Britain growing faster and becoming more competitive. But if there are other people that want to, put that case across, great.
But didn't your premiership prove that deficit-financed tax cuts are not the answer? Isn't that the model of a Liz Truss premiership?
Well, I don't agree with the premise of your question, because what we were talking about on corporation tax is not raising corporation tax. The problem is that because we don't have, in my view, sufficiently dynamic forecasting, the prediction was that would cost money. And it was the direct relationship of the OBR forecasts with the market that's the issue. And the prevailing orthodoxy, which is that raising taxes increases revenue.
And you think
in my view, that's what the problem is. I mean, we already have a deficit. We already have a big debt. The question is the best way to deal with that debt cutting taxes, increasing growth, or is the best way of dealing with that debt raising taxes? Now, my view is raising taxes is counterproductive It's not actually going to lead to reducing debt in 5 years' time, but that, my view, is not shared by this broader orthodoxy.
I think that was actually a very interesting answer there from Liz Truss, because this is where we need to be careful on the left, because I can imagine that being said by a left-wing government, but obviously replacing tax cuts with spending. So she's saying the Treasury orthodoxy, because they are into sort of accounting, they just want to make sure the spending is equal or close enough equal to the income. They don't think about the long run effects of things. And she's saying they assume that tax cuts will lose the money. But actually what I think is that tax cuts will in the long run make the money because it will cause growth. We on the left say, well, we think, well, I mean, we have historically over the past 12 years, because we've been opposing austerity, say that the Treasury think that spending cuts will necessarily lower the debt. But actually that's wrong, because if you increase spending, then that will increase growth, and then ultimately that will increase tax revenue. So there is a bit of a mirror to those arguments. Obviously, I think, one, the evidence in favour of spending is stronger than the evidence in favour of tax cuts. And that's particularly because rich people don't tend to spend much of their money compared to poorer people. So if you give poorer people more money, they're going to spend more of it than richer people. Also, if you increase spending, you get to do other good things like increase equality and maybe invest in a green industrial revolution, for example. But I can see that same critique of the Treasury coming from the left as from the right.
I want to talk economics in just a second, but can I just be really petty and emotive
Please.
for 1 second? I didn't realise until this very moment of watching her speak to The Spectator without a single ounce of self-reflection or humility that I properly loathe Liz Truss, because of course we've had idiotic prime ministers in the very recent past. We've had prime ministers who only operate in the interests of financial elites in the very recent past. We've had prime ministers with much higher body counts in this country's recent political history. But there is something about the outsized ratio between Liz Truss's ego and Liz Truss's basic core competencies that I find utterly infuriating. And in some ways, she's a victim of her own lack of talent. You know what I mean? She was kind of hoisted up on high by an army of hangers-on and editors in the media, particularly the Mail and the Telegraph, who saw her as a useful vehicle for their own economic agenda. And because she's essentially a narcissist, I mean, all that girl wanted was to be on the cover of Vogue, really. She even asked Nicola Sturgeon how she managed to land it. It's that hollowness and that fundamental inadequacy and how it is rewarded by a dysfunctional political system and a dysfunctional media ecology, which genuinely drives me up the wall. But on the point of the economics of it, Michael, I think you're totally right to say that it's really dangerous for anybody who thinks of themselves as a leftist or socialist or progressive, or however you describe your outlook, to be uncritical in endorsing the idea that markets should be disciplining governments. All right. It's fundamentally undemocratic. Markets don't abide by democratic rules, governments do. And ultimately, we believe in an idea of parliamentary sovereignty, both legally and that also it is legitimate for the electorate to express their will and have it followed through without unelected elites curtailing what's been voted for. The problem with Liz Truss, of course, is that, number one, you had a very, very narrow selectorate of Tory party members who economically and socially are really unrepresentative of the wider electorate. So you didn't have a mandate that was coming from the people. You had a real reverse ferret on the election-winning manifesto of 2019, which did have a mandate. And you also had someone who was, like I said, spectacularly ill-equipped to be in charge of, well, I mean, I wouldn't put her in charge of a creche, let alone a government. If you read through that 4,000-word essay in The Telegraph, she claims never to have been aware of the problem with LDIs. LDIs are, of course, this aspect of pension funds which are really, really sensitive to, rapid fluctuations in interest rates and market volatility. Now, because Liz Truss tried to push through an economic program which was uncosted, right? This is the critical element. It was largely uncosted. It was a vibes-based economic platform. That's what led to market volatility. It helped lead to the rise in interest rates, and that led to a huge destabilization of the LDIs. She claimed not to have been aware of any of that. And implicitly, she's trying to blame the Treasury. She's like, well, no one in the Treasury did their job and told me or my Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, what might happen. Now, that's in fact not true. You've had a very senior economist come out and say, actually, I did warn Kwasi Kwarteng and the Liz Truss government about the risks posed to LDIs by market volatility. And even if that didn't happen immediately, you would think that Liz Truss, who really did trumpet her experience in the Treasury as a reason why she was qualified the role, that this should have been something that she was definitely on top of, that she was definitely aware of. This is like I said, a basic core competency. So this isn't an excuse that really holds any water or cuts the mustard. And I think that what you're seeing in terms of the Telegraph and of course its sister paper, The Spectator, are trying to, revive some of her political credibility is because they really sincerely believe in tax cuts for the rich. That's what they want to happen. And they know that Liz Truss has single-handedly and spectacularly discredited their personal economic orthodoxy. So they, I think, quite wrongly think that by wheeling her out again and having her, bleat into the camera that it was all the OBR's fault, that it's going to sort of revive a bit of the political momentum for the low-tax Tories. Now, taking a step away from the economics of it to the political case, Rishi Sunak is an exceptionally weak prime minister. He's not well liked by the public. The Conservative Party tend to fluctuate between, 16 and 20 points behind Labour. The public have a very, very low opinion of his government's ability to deal with the problems which are facing this country, notably around cost of living and public sector pay. And within his own party, he is really quite unpopular. Everybody knows that he wasn't, shall we say, the Conservative Party's first choice of prom date. He was the first alternate. He just happened to be the guy that Liz Truss was running against. So he was the one brought in to try and clean up her mess. And he is in the unenviable position of being disliked by Johnson's allies for his role in Johnson's downfall, but also not really getting any of the credit for helping to bring him down. So his base of support within the Parliamentary Conservative Party is very, very flimsy. And when you add on to that, you've got Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, who are not behaving like backbenchers. They're putting the work in to keep their profile up. They're trying to galvanize support around them. And they're sort of lurking in the wings going, is there a path back to the top job for me? Liz Truss's pitch to the public might be, it's absurd. It's risible. It's really not even worth paying too much attention to, or at least don't take it that seriously. But in many ways, it's not aimed at the public. It's aimed at the Conservative Party benches to go, well, maybe I'm not as down and out. Maybe the low tax agenda isn't as down and out as everybody says it was. So think about this as a political vehicle, not a pitch to me and you.